And whenever you're ready, Adina.
The Conviction Integrity and Wrongful Convictions monthly meeting. I'm Adina Thompson. I support folks who have post-conviction grants from BJA here at the Quattrone Center. And this month, we're going to be having a special DNA edition of this meeting. And so I'd like to introduce our guest with no further ado. Shannon, if you would advance the slide, please. Oop, that was my mistake. I have one more thing to say first before
Okay.
I introduce our guest. For folks, Shannon, if you would advance
Oh,
and just
sorry.
thank
There
you.
you go.
For folks who have taken this survey that the Post Conviction TTA has put out through the Quattrone Center, thank you so much. For folks who haven't, I hope you'll scan this QR code and take this survey after our webinar is over. We're collecting information about DNA experts in private laboratories to create a resource for the post-conviction community. So if there's someone that you worked with that you want to tell us about, please use this code to access that information and tell us about that. And now, without further ado, Shannon, if you would advance, I'd like to introduce Shannon Turner, who is our speaker for today.
Hello.
Shannon has a vast experience that started out as an evidence technician and is now involved in two different companies, File on Q and Focus on Evidence. And Shannon is responsible for, among other things, helping evidence holding agencies modernize, organize, digitize, and otherwise recreate their evidence management systems. So I know that folks who are on this call today, some of you I've talked to, and I know that you've encountered evidence rooms that are in disarray, and it makes it really difficult for you to do your job. And so many of us on this call, as part of our work, we search for evidence. And Shannon is going to talk about what the people who hold the evidence are meant to do, and she's going to tell us about some best practices. So, Shannon, we're so glad that you're here, and I would be remiss if I did not mention your work in civil litigation. Specifically with Focus on Evidence, Shannon supports civil litigants who've been exonerated to indicate that the evidence. Well, Shannon, you can explain better than I
Yeah,
can. Would you mind?
let's do it. So I'm a storyteller. Stories help me learn. Let me, Adina was saying that I have kind of a vast background. I do. Um, I I live in Washington State, and
Yeah.
people, when I say Washington, they're like, "Oh, Washington D.C." I go, "No, no, no, Washington AC," and they look at me funny, and I say it stands for above California. Well, I live, like I said, in Washington State. I was raised in an extremely sheltered environment. I laugh and I tell people I was raised by Bob and Carol Brady. I knew nothing of the outside world. Well, I got my very first job right out of high school working for a law firm. And one was on the adult criminal defense panel, the other one was on the juvenile defense panel. And I fell in love very quickly with criminal law. This was just fascinating to me. And one of the attorneys, he was very nice and he taught me a lot about, you know, probable cause and elements of a crime and that type of thing. So one day we were going through all the new cases that he had gotten in, and it was this kid was charged with in Washington it's called malicious mischief, but he was making Molotov cocktails in his bedroom and then blowing up neighbors' mailboxes, right? So I think that Terry was kind of trying to figure out what kind of 18-year-old I was, and he looks at me and he says, Shannon, do you know how to make a Molotov cocktail? And I said, oh no, I don't drink. So that's how incredibly sheltered I was. I had no idea what a Molotov cocktail was. So after 3 years there at this law firm, I went to work at our county prosecuting attorney's office. I was a victim advocate and a child victim forensic interviewer. And I worked very closely with victims of crime and families of victims of crime. Now, occasionally, a prosecutor will decline to file charges. And a lot of times, the reason is insufficient evidence. Well, I would have parents, especially, say, "What do you mean insufficient evidence? I know he did it. I know he did it." And I would explain to them, knowing somebody committed a crime and proving they committed a crime is a lot like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. All the pieces have to fit just right, and you have all different types of pieces, but the most important piece of that puzzle is evidence. And if that piece is missing, it isn't complete, and you can't prove that someone committed a crime. So after almost 11 years there, I then became a police evidence technician and crime scene investigator. I spent 10 years doing that. These are back in my meth lab glory days. And FYI, one size does not fit all. Um, and so I took, though, that victim advocate hat with me because in my new position, I still interacted with people who had been victims of crime and sensitive issues that I tried to remember, the people that were involved. So after 10 years doing that, then I joined File on Q. And since joining File on Q now 20 years ago, I have worked with over 300 agencies to implement the Evidence on Q system to help train them and et cetera. And in my capacity, I still have that victim advocate hat on and remembering the people. And as I'm training these agencies, I tell them these packages and envelopes and boxes that you're moving hither and yon and to and fro, they aren't just a package, they aren't just a box. They represent people. It represents somebody who probably has gone through one of the most traumatic experiences of their life. And the way that you manage it is going to have a positive or a negative impact on the people involved. And then initially I was like, I remember these victims, these are the victims of cases that I worked on, and I told a little bit about them. But as I have been working with the post exonerees, I also am adding, remember the innocent people who have been victimized by the system. And those are some names that we all know: Alan Newton, Willie Grimes, Ronnie Long, Charles Finch. So what do I do now? Like Adina said, I have a couple different hats. What I do at File on Q, I've been the vice president over sales and marketing since last October. I work with agencies to look at their evidence management processes, make recommendations on maybe how to improve it. I help implement and train agencies. I've helped them write new policies and procedures. I've helped agencies with planning and executing a move, of their property room. Then in 2009, I began my own business called Focus on Evidence. What do I do in the capacity of Focus on Evidence? Well, here's what I do. I do instruction for an association here in Washington State, for the Oregon Property Officers Association, also for California. I'm the instructor for Washington State's 40-hour evidence management class that's done by their training commission, the police academy. I also provide consulting for agencies in evidence management, audits, inventories, recommendations, et cetera. And then I also provide expert witness services in civil litigation. These are post exonerees and post-conviction exonerees, and then that includes, research, written opinions, and testimony. So I wanted to share with you a few of the cases that I have worked on. Won't go into details, but just to kind of explain ones that I have been involved with. I'm sure that you're all aware of the National Registry of Exonerees. This is a wealth of information. You can go to this website that I believe it's sponsored by the University of Michigan. So the first case I worked on was Alan Newton, who spent 22 years in prison for something he did not commit. Dwayne Dale, 18 years. Willie Grimes, 24 years. Joseph Sledge, 37 years. And sadly, Mr. Sledge passed away in 2020. Edward McInnes, 27 years. And Charles Finch, 43 years. He also passed away in 2022. And Ronnie Long, who spent 44 years in prison for something he didn't do. I have become incredibly passionate after reading through um, thousands, I'm going to say 20, maybe 30,000 pages of discovery in all of these cases. And the injustice, the lack of accountability, and the lack of simply managing evidence properly was appalling in these cases. So, what I'd like to do is I'd like to teach you a little bit about what are the absolute minimum requirements for managing property and evidence. These are just the minimum requirements. I'll go through these very quickly and then we'll talk about each one a little bit more in detail. They're responsible for receiving the incoming evidence, thoroughly documenting these incoming items, for having an organized way of storing the evidence so they can recover it. They're responsible for preserving the condition of the evidence, also to maintain a complete chain of custody, and then to maintain security of the evidence facility. Now, when the time comes, if it's available, they're also responsible for lawfully releasing or disposing of these items. Now, you may look at these and say, well, these are really basic. Yes, they are. They're very basic. And you probably wouldn't, given your capacity, be surprised at the number of agencies that don't even do these bare minimums. And the reason that those seven men that I showed you were in prison for so long is because the agencies involved did not do these minimum requirements. So the first we're going to chat about is receiving incoming property and evidence to make sure that everything is packaged correctly and make sure that it's logged and tagged and bagged and etc. Agencies should have packaging guidelines. They should also have evidence submission policies. I worked on a case where I was reviewing the agency's policies and procedures, and it literally said that if the officer wants to maintain the custody of that evidence, they can, or if they want to turn it into the evidence, division, they can do that too. I was like speechless. No, absolutely not. You must submit it. Um, they should also have routine audits to make sure that they're following their own policies. They should also have the right of refusal, meaning if they receive it from that investigating officer and it's not packaged correctly, they should have the right to say, no, I won't accept this. You need to come in and package it correctly. Okay, we're going to have some fun here. I don't know if you got to hear that little brrrr. Okay, it was from a game show. We're going to play a game of what's wrong with this picture. Now, I usually do this when I have a classroom of people around me and they can just start throwing out answers. Never done it on a webinar. So what I want you to do is I want you to find your chat there. And if you could tell me, we're going to play this game. And these are all pictures that I took personally. So they are not ones that I made up or staged. They are real life. So first of all, what is wrong with this picture? Does anyone want to throw that in this chat?
Now monitoring, so as people answer, Shannon and I will
Yeah,
report.
yeah. So this was an agency that I did some work for, and they everything was on paper. So they didn't have a computer system or anything. And I walked into their evidence room, and leaning against the wall was this. So it's hard to tell what this is. It had a long, I think it was like an axe handle, and then this, what are those things called? Sheath, a sieve, the big curved knife. And it was stuck in there and then had duct tape and everything else. It was obviously homemade. And it was leaning up against the wall. And then it had this paperwork attached to it like this. No sealed package. Yeah. No tag. So is it protecting the evidence from being contaminated? Nope. Exposed, right? Is it protecting you from being hurt by this? Nope. Um, if if they needed to get any type of DNA or anything off that, they're screwed on that. Plus the paperwork that is attached to it is not secure. That was it. It was just over the handle. Okay, let's keep going on. The next one is, what is wrong with this picture? And this was at the same agency. Is that evidence tape doing any good whatsoever? Marissa, do you want to do you want to talk?
No,
Take
it's
your
just like
hand.
everything is
Yeah.
wrong, right?
It,
Like, I
it-
mean, I'm
yeah,
assuming there could be DNA on the handle, on the knife blades, like
yep,
who knows where. Anybody
definitely
can
no
touch it. It can
prints.
get GSR on it. Like it, that's
Sure.
crazy.
Yeah, it's not packaged, it's not safe and secure. That evidence tape is doing absolutely nothing. Maybe it's holding the blade in, but it's certainly not securing it or showing any kind of, chain of custody or anything like that. And then they just wrapped the paperwork around it. Here's another one. Oh, same agency. Oh, this one gets lots of laughs. Okay, is the gun protected? No, it should be in a box. Is there any evidence tape? Is it safe and secure? No. Here's another one that is really important. How do I know that this isn't loaded? I don't. There's no zip tie through it or anything like that. Um, every single thing about this is absolutely wrong. Here's another one. This one I did not take. I got it from my friend Jamie, who works for our state crime lab. This is clothing from a sexual assault.
Oh my.
What's Did someone just say, "Oh my God"? Yes. Cross-contamination. Yes, Maurice, you are exactly correct. Cross-contamination. They should all be packaged individually. How about this one? These are the lockers, the temp lockers that officers put stuff in. I was at an agency and I said, "Hey, let's see what you have in your intake." And we opened it up and it was sitting right there. Let's actually pose this differently. Is there anything right about this picture? Nope. No label, no idea what it is. Why is it there? Is it zero paperwork, no identification, nada, right? You guys are doing a great job. Okay. Ooh, here's a good one. What is wrong with this picture? These both pictures, there's something they have in common that is wrong. They are not sealed correctly. So if you look at this one on the bottom, see how this envelope, things could fall out, it's not secure. Let's look at how evidence should be sealed. They should have a proper tape seal that extends across the entire opening of the container. It should wrap around the sides to make sure that little flaps aren't open. It should be tamper evident. So they should also have, you'll see on this, they have their initials, and then they have the date and the time, and it should start on the tape, and then it should run onto the paper or the container. That way, if someone tries to break that seal, it will be very obvious that they tried to break the seal. Okay. Well, we don't need to talk about that one right now. Okay, that was number one. Number two. Thanks for playing What's Wrong with This Picture? Number two, maintain thorough documentation, and that's where a lot of agencies tend to fail. Why do you have to have it documented? Well, to make sure it's accurate, to hold them accountable. Agencies do have various ways of documenting and tracking their evidence. Some of them will do it just on paper, or maybe a combination of paper and electronic. Some might just put it in an old-fashioned Excel sheet. Maybe they use an evidence management module of their RMS, which stands for Records Management System. Maybe they have a standalone evidence system. Or maybe they have one that was made in-house, that's managed by their own department. Evidence records should be updated in real time. You shouldn't have an agency that has a stack of paperwork or anything that, oh, this is a destruction we did last month and I just need to get it updated. It should be updated immediately. If they are strictly on paper, it should be organized and it should be protected from any kind of damage or loss or manipulation. I was chatting with a friend of mine who is an evidence supervisor They're on the west coast of Florida. And he said, well, I'm here and I don't know if we'll have an evidence room when we're done with this hurricane. Also, if they are electronic, they should have their data backed up in case of ransomware or fire or hurricanes, natural disasters, that type of thing. So this right here, it's a little bit hard to see. This is a shotgun, okay? And it's just leaning up. And this paper right here, that is the only documentation of this gun. And it was just rolled up into a little roll and stuffed into the barrel. Again, so many things wrong with this. But I'm amazed at how many agencies just look at things like this and think that is okay because no one's taught them any differently. One of the third thing that they are responsible for is having an organized systematic storage method. It needs to be a logical method for storing this evidence to protect it from being contaminated, being stolen, being lost. Some agencies, and that's the first thing I will ask them is, do you have a list of items that are unable to locate? And every single agency does. They're like, don't know where it is. And I go through a very lengthy dissertation on what they should do, but they should not have a list of unable to locate. That is a huge red flag of there is something wrong in their methods because they can't find evidence. Okay, let's take a little look-see. I won't tell you what I said exactly when I walked into this room. Do you mean the lab actually has their own list of cannot locate? I mostly in my experience, it is the law enforcement agencies. He said, this is my uncle's basement. I like that one. But occasionally, yes, there was a case, I believe in Georgia, where they had lost a gun on a capital murder case. The police department said the lab has it, and the lab said, no, the police department has it. And I have actually worked on a couple of cases where the crime lab said they didn't have it, and they did, or said they didn't. Yeah, vice versa. So yes. So I walked into this and, the people are just like, here's our property room. And okay, I love that comment. That agency might not even have a can locate list. That brings me to my story. I said, and I have to be somewhat professional and politically correct. So I asked him, do you ever have a hard time finding evidence? And they're like, yes, yes, we do. Imagine my surprise, right? They said, in fact, let's look at this shelf right here. I'm going to pop that out. They said, yeah, in fact, a couple weeks ago, we were looking for a screwdriver and we could not find it. And we had to empty everything off the shelf and we finally found it. She's like, well, we found it eventually. Think of all the time. But here's the thing that appalls me. They put it back on the shelf in a great big pile. See, for me, the type A OCD, I would say, oh, this is a perfect opportunity to organize this, but nope. Let me show you another one that you go, ooh, ah. Look, these girls here, they're smiling because their evidence room is so organized. They can very easily go to and find things that they're looking for. I'd like to show you what my evidence room looked like when I walked in. Typical evidence room might not look too bad to you if you've been in some of those. It has, the obligatory case of Corona, tennis shoe, the 2x4, the rock. But I found I was not utilizing my space. I kept thinking, I am just overflowing. I don't have any room. And then I realized, actually, I have a lot of wasted space. So long story short, this is what it looked like after I reorganized it. I added boxes, more containers. I moved the shelves so I didn't have any wasted space. It can be done. All right, number 4 of the essential elements of evidence management is to preserve the condition of the property and evidence. So it should be preserved in its original condition and stored appropriately to avoid it degrading or being contaminated. Some common issues that I have seen are things are simply packaged incorrectly, meaning it was put in plastic and it should have been paper and now it's full of mold or that type of thing. Mold that develops, or maybe it was consumed by an unauthorized evidence tech, which could be mice or rats or vermin. Or maybe the tape fell off, it was old evidence. And it's interesting how I'll be in a property room and I'll say, so what all is all of this? Oh, that's just old homicide stuff. That's old cold cases. That's old, and they just shrug their shoulders and go, oh, it's just old homicide evidence. Like it doesn't matter. And they don't put any care into the packaging of it or the inventorying of it or the documentation of it. Or maybe something leaked in the bag and now it's contaminated the whole thing, or it's not identified as evidence. There's no markings or anything on it. Or not only is it not stored in the right container, the packaging, but the environment. So let's talk a little bit about climate control. You know what? I think I'll do that here in just a second. No temperature control. Let's go through this. Some of you may be familiar with the NIST handbook, NIST, and that will be available for you to scan and download in PDF format. But I wanted to show you an example of, in the NIST handbook, it goes through how things should be stored. Now, this one that we're looking at is short term, meaning it came in, maybe you're just holding it for a little while before it needs to go off to the lab. So you'll see that we have 4 options. We've got frozen, refrigerated, temperature controlled, and room temperature. All of them are pretty self-explanatory, except for temperature controlled. Basically, your office, if you have a thermostat on there, you can control the temperature, right? It stays within. But if many agencies who are either in the South or in places where it's very humid or very hot, they have off-site storage location. Or they have a warehouse and there is no air conditioning. So it could get, 110 in the summer and then in the winter it gets really cold or it gets really humid. And so the temperature is going up and down and up and down. That is not a temperature controlled or climate controlled environment. A lot of agencies too will say, well, we have this, they call them a Connex. It kind of looks like a railroad train car. We have a couple of these out back for all of our old homicide evidence, and we just stick them back there. I was in the middle of Central California in the summertime, and it was about 110 degrees, and they took me out to show me all of their homicide evidence that was in this container, and it was so hot, and I educated them a little bit about if you have DNA in here, it's not going to be very happy. That's one of the biggest things that will degrade DNA is heat, and then going from cold to hot to cold to hot. Okay. Also in the NIST book, we have the long-term storage. So just wanted to call your attention to this on that there are proper ways to package and to store specific evidence. The next thing that they are responsible for is maintaining a complete chain of custody. A chain of custody is absolutely vital. And if they do not maintain a good chain of custody, what could happen? Maybe the charges weren't filed, or maybe the case was dismissed, or evidence would be suppressed by the court. Or maybe it is lost or misplaced. And as we know, innocent people imprisoned. What is a chain of custody? It also can end up in lawsuits. you will remember from my first slides about all the millions of dollars that just those 7 men received in damages, and that those agencies had to pay out. So let's talk the chain of custody and really get into the nitty gritty. The chain of custody should tell a story. First of all, what is being transferred? What is moving back and forth? Not just an item number. This is item number 2, 4, and 7. Well, what are 2, 4, and 7? It should include the actual description of those items. Who is involved in the transfer? And we don't want initials or scribbles or just a signature that you can't read. It should have their signature, and then it should have their full printed name, and if possible, an ID number. I spent an exorbitant amount of time going through all of the 40-year-old documentation in the Allen Newton case, and this was the biggest challenge. I couldn't read handwriting. I couldn't read names. It had initials. There was no way to tell who was involved in these transactions. When was it transferred? You need a date and you need a time. Why was it transferred? Back in the Allen Newton case, I was looking at some of these transfers and they weren't logical. The person it was going to and the time it was going to them wasn't logical in the chronology of the case. And so it said it had been checked out to this person, but in my opinion, there was no logical reason why it should have been checked out and viewed. So why are you transferring this? Maybe someone needs to view it. Maybe it's going to the lab for analysis, or the investigator is checking it out for follow-up, or I've also seen agencies where they're very lax and they'll say, oh, out to court. And their policy was they were on paper at the time, and so they would take paper from an active file and then they would put it in the out to court file. But the out to court was a catch-all. It was for anything. It was for the lab, or any time it went out of their custody, they just put it in this out to court folder, and which was of course very misleading because they weren't out to court. Let's also talk about how was it transferred? What method? So did you take it to that person, one-to-one in person, or was it via a courier? Was it from like UPS or the US Postal Service? If it was, then they should always have the documentation of like the tracking number and everywhere it had been. And you can even get that tracking information from those couriers. You can just go online, put it in, and you know where it's been. If I were managing a property room, I would probably print that out and then put it in, scan it into that case. So I had the chain of custody while it was with that courier. The next thing that agencies are responsible for doing is ensuring adequate security. You would think that this is a no-brainer. You need to make sure that all this property and evidence is secure, which means secure of your temp lockers. I've seen temp lockers that were easily just jimmied open with a screwdriver. I've seen ones that are not attached to the wall. You could actually just pick it up and walk away with it. Ones that had keys, there was a key for each one, but the keys were actually on the wall. And so the officer would grab the key off the wall. I should put a picture in here for you. They would open it up and then they would drop the key into the key slot. And so every morning the evidence tech had to come out and take all those keys and line them up and then open everything up and put the keys back on the hooks. There's a few things wrong with that. First of all, you've got all these keys just sitting on a hook outside where everybody in the department is walking by. Anybody could grab one of those keys and either open it or make copies of it. also, I asked, his name was Bruce. I said, Bruce, what about these keys right here? You're missing 4 of them. Does that mean that there's stuff in the lockers? He said, no, that means we lost the key. Oh, okay. So what's in the locker? I don't know. We can't get it open. I went to an agency once where they had this big, beautiful gun safe, like shiny green, the kind that you would spend thousands of dollars on, out at the Sportsman's Warehouse or everything. And I said, so I'm assuming these are your guns? And he's like, I don't know. Well, could we open it and find out? No, I don't have the combination. He was a brand new chief. And I said, well, I hate to tell you this, chief, but we need to know what's in there. So he took a crowbar and he opened it up. And sure enough, there were dozens and dozens of guns in there. It's important for them to have limited access to the property room. I can't tell you how many times I have seen agencies that are very lax in who has access. There's all sorts of keys flowing around. The chief of police has a key to the property room. Why? There is no reason that a chief of police should have a key to the property room unless he's a one-man department and he's the only person. I'll tell you a quick story. I was doing a web meeting with an agency a few years ago, and I thought it was really interesting that in this web meeting was the evidence tech lady. Then we had a sergeant, we had an internal affairs person, we had a couple captains, and the chief. And usually I don't get that kind of much interest. So I asked, what brought you to the point where you said you need to, restructure your evidence management? And there was this quiet at the other end, and he's like, well, so one of our detectives had an addiction to meth, and he had access to the property room. And so, of course, I'm thinking, okay, stop you right here. Why did this detective have access to the property room? But anyway, he said, so the detective had access to the property room, and he would go in after hours and steal the meth, replace it with some inert substance or something, so it wasn't obvious. And he'd been doing that for quite some time. So this is the chief telling me the story now. So one morning, our evidence custodian opened the door and walked in and found this detective laying dead in the middle of the property room. And he had gotten into some meth that was laced with fentanyl, and it killed him. So, of course, I was really glad I didn't have my camera on, because I'm like trying to decide, how do I respond to this story? I was like, yeah, it is. This is the mic drop moment of the webinar. Thank you. I didn't want to make light of it and say, "Oh, hate it when that happens." I just said, "Oh, I'm sorry that happened, and let's see if we can't get you in a better situation." But man, I was speechless. It was. So another thing too is the security of offsite locations or outbuildings. Sometimes agencies, they'll be so hyper alert of secure of what's inside of their department. Yeah, I didn't have my camera on. It was a web meeting and I didn't have my web camera on, which was good. That way they couldn't see me go, so sometimes agencies will put in lots of security for inside their department, but as they grow and don't purge the evidence out of their property room, they're going to get full. So maybe they rent a storage unit, or they have some outbuildings, or, oh, hey, the shops told us we could have their garage, and those are the ones that don't have the security. They aren't alarmed. They don't have cameras. It's just a simple padlock that's easy to get into. Some agencies don't have any kind of alarm. When I'm teaching my class at the academy, I ask them, how many of you have like a panic button or an alarm? And they will raise their hand, and I'll say, okay, so if that alarm goes off, who does it go to? Who monitors that? And they're like, I don't know. So I tell them, go back and test it, push that alarm and see who comes running. So it is really important to have alarms. It's also extremely important that after you have a change in personnel at the property room, that they should change the keys and the locks, or redo the PIN or the passcode or the proximity card. I've seen agencies where it was actually just a key and it was passed down from tech to tech. And how do you know that a copy of it wasn't made? Lastly, to lawfully release or dispose of items when the time comes. Now, I say lawfully, there are guidelines that you need to check off before you determine something should be destroyed or released. So, first of all, has the case been adjudicated? Meaning, have they pled guilty? Were they found guilty? Was it dismissed? Were they found not guilty? Are there any appeals pending? Do they have a court order authorizing the destruction? This is where it really varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And that's a challenge is there really aren't any state statutes or federal laws about evidence retention. States are getting now individual statutes on DNA and how they have to hold the DNA, sexual assault kits, crime lab work product for X period of time. But you're not going to just find, I won't go into the RCWs of Washington and find out, here's how long I have to keep burglary evidence. There just isn't anything there. So some agencies also, or jurisdictions, should I say, require a court order. For example, in the state of California, anything that was seized pursuant to a search warrant must have a court order before it can be released to the owner or destroyed. Some states I've also seen that if it's a gun or if it's drugs, they have to have a court order. Others, they do not. So it really varies from state to state, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And it can also vary on what the prosecuting attorney prefers. Another thing too is that I always tell agencies, if you are dealing with a major crime where someone is in prison, you must get the authorization from that district attorney, prosecuting attorney, to authorize the destruction of it. They're going to have the best knowledge of what the status is. Some agencies, they simply go to the investigating officer. Hey, what's going on with this case? Can I get rid of it? And they go, yeah, I was there at trial. He was found guilty. Sure, get rid of it. But they don't have the knowledge that maybe the prosecutor does, that it's on appeal or anything like that, or they have been receiving, claims of innocence. Oh, so hold on a second here. So let's recap what we talked about for our basic evidence management. Receive the incoming evidence, make sure it's packaged correctly, verified, stored correctly. Thoroughly document that incoming evidence. Establish an organized, systematic way of storing things. Preserve the condition of the evidence. Maintain a complete chain of custody. Have security of that evidence facility. And then lawfully release or dispose of the items. I want to take a quick breather, and we're going to wait until the end for questions, but we're really doing good on time. And before I get into this next part, I'd like to see if you have any questions about any of the specific topics that I addressed already, as far as, basic evidence management responsibilities. If you do, we'll just throw them in the chat.
Hi, I got a question.
Sure.
With your when you say that you request their policies, procedures, and their UTLs. Do you do that ahead of time, or do you, when you get there, you just say, show it to me?
Yeah, I don't do it ahead of time. I only do it when I determine there is a systemic problem. In fact, I will go into that right now about how to ease into it, what questions to ask when to be nice and when to be obnoxious.
Shannon, you've got a question in the chat. Do you have
Okay.
any guidelines for property evidence transferred from one property room to another? And the example is from the police property room to a prosecutor's property room. And specifically, should the police who release the property to the prosecutor maintain records that they did once hold it, even though they no longer actually have it?
Yeah, and it says that then, and they would never have it again. So there is an interesting distinction. I remember working with the San Francisco Police Department on this very specific issue, that if they are releasing it, I said, let's develop two different terminologies. Release means I'm giving it to someone else and it's never coming back. Like you're giving it to another agency, the FBI, it's going here or there, and it will never come back. So I said, let's use the terminology released to other agency, released to, okay, released to court, released to district attorney. However, a lot of like district attorneys and courts, they will keep it for maybe a lengthy period of time, but what I have found to mostly be the case is that when they are done with the evidence, it goes back to the originating investigative agency. So I was at the Pasco Police Department. Something got admitted into court there in Franklin County. And then it could have been a year, 2, 10, in my case, 17 years later, when they were cleaning out their evidence vault, and they said, oh, these cases are all over, we need to give them back to you. And so back with San Francisco, I said, if you are giving it to someone, like it's out to court or out to the DA's office, you know that the way your processes work, it's eventually going to come back to you. So don't use the word release, use the word checked out. Checked out to court, checked out to the district attorney. So if something is going to be released and you know you're never getting it back, then you document who it went to and you're done. Okay. But if you know that I am checking it out and it's eventually going to come back, you need to make sure that you still monitor that. Maybe every year or two, call the court clerk's office. Do you still have this item, or the prosecutor or whoever? Because eventually it will come back to you. I was working with an agency and they released it to an investigator or checked it out to an investigator for follow-up. And I said, so do you have any method in place for when an investigator checks it out that you follow up with them? They have 3 days to bring it back, or a week, or what? And she's like, nope. And her exact words were, once it leaves my property room, it's not my problem. And I love to joke and have fun and make light of things, but I can also be serious as a heart attack. And I looked at her and I said, it is your problem. I'm going to disagree with you. It absolutely is your problem, because the investigator who checked it out, or whoever, they're not trained in evidence management. They don't care about, the chain of custody and everything like that. So if you don't care, if it's not your problem, then whose problem is it? It won't be anybody's. So I help them implement a policy that after 3 days, if that investigator hasn't brought it back, then they get an email that says you have to bring it back. So like in Georgia with the problem with the gun, where the police department thought the lab had it and the lab thought the police department had it. There was no check-in with the lab. It's like, oh, why did they have this for so long? My opinion is you should do some routine follow-ups. the agency will have an idea of how long it takes for their lab to do analysis and turnaround time. You know, they're like, oh, if it's DNA, I'm not even going to ask for 6 months, or, you know, that type of thing. But I would have them either have a file that they go through and look at to make sure that these items are still at the lab, or a good computer system will actually tell you, show me what's been at the lab longer than 6 months or longer than a year. I like to err on the side of caution and check in with that entity who has that item to ensure that they still have it.
Shannon?
That was a long answer to that question. I'm sorry.
Okay. Shannon, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, yeah, that was my question. I'm Shane.
Hi, Shane.
So let's say it's a release situation, all right?
Okay.
We use the term release. You know
Mhm.
you're never getting this back because you've turned it over to, say, to a prosecutor's office.
Okay.
Do you have a policy where the department who
Mhm.
released it maintains those records like indefinitely to say, yeah, we had it at one time, but
Yes.
we've since given it to somebody else and it's no longer ours?
Yes, 100%. It depends on records retention. And I believe that's usually at a state level. Last time I checked, records retention in Washington was 7 years. But that's where they would need to maintain the record. So even though maybe you have an item and it was released or whatever, you are still obligated to maintain the documentation for whatever that state's records retention statute is. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. When I'm working with agencies for implementing evidence management systems, we talk about bringing in their old data, and I tell them, they'll say, oh, we just need to bring in all of our active stuff. I said, no, you need to bring back everything in the last 8 years because that's your state's record retention. For public disclosure, you have to be able to provide that to them. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about who to contact. Who do I get a hold of? I had personally, I'd pick up the phone and had a phone call from an attorney or someone who said, hey, I need to have information about this case. Calling up an evidence tech usually is going to do absolutely no good. They're not going to disclose any information to you over the phone. Because they can't verify who you are or what you're going to do with it and that type of thing. So it would always have to be in writing, and it should go to the appropriate authority. I've seen so many of the Innocence Project cases where they were just sort of randomly sent to whoever would listen, and that request didn't make its way to the right people. So let's talk about who are the right people. For city police departments, address it to the chief of police. Also, I would copy it to the city manager and the original case officer if they're available. I know some of these cases are old, so they're either retired or dead. And also to the district attorney or prosecuting attorney who handled the case. Send it to as many people as you can. The police chief is the one who would give the authority to the evidence tech to say, yes, it's okay to release this. Or he might run it past their city attorney and ask if they can do it. But if it just goes to one person, it's easy for it to just, get lost in a pile of papers, or they look at it and go, But if lots of people get notification, then more people are in the know about this, right? What if it's a sheriff's office? Okay, if it's a sheriff's office, you should address it to the current elected sheriff. Also send a copy to maybe the county board of commissioners. Different counties are structured differently, but maybe look at how that county is structured. And then again, CC the prosecuting attorney who was involved in the case. Or if that prosecutor is gone, then the current prosecutor or district attorney. What if it's a court clerk that you're trying to get information from? Address it to the elected clerk, CC it to the prosecuting attorney and also CC it to the original investigating agency, probably the chief or sheriff and original case officer. If it's a crime lab, address it to the crime lab director. So crime labs, a lot of times it's a state crime lab, Georgia GBI, Washington State Patrol Crime Lab, larger agencies, the LAPDs and the big agencies like that have their own lab director that would be under the umbrella of that police department or sheriff's office. So address it to the crime lab director. You can usually find that out online with a Google search. And then CC the investigating agency's chief or sheriff and the original investigator. Any specific questions about who to contact right there? Nope. Okay. Now, when you start, and I think this was Shane's question, first of all, start out nice. My recommendation is just clearly identify your purpose for the request. Make it a one-page simple letter in writing. And first of all, start out with and appeal to their sense of humanity. Tell them a little bit about this person in custody and why do you need their help? I need your help in finding out the truth. I need your help in this. And this man's been in prison for 22 years, and I really need your help in seeking the truth. And then allow them sufficient time to do their research. 3 or 4 weeks is probably a reasonable amount of time. And very polite about it. Please, you can reach me at this, send it to this information. I can come pick it up. I would like to have it by this date, if possible. And then if you don't get response or don't hear from them by that date, then you can, follow up. Just start with the basics on your requests. What you're doing is you're testing out the waters to see how cooperative they're going to be before hitting them with the hard questions, the really time-consuming questions. They're a lot more apt to respond to you if you are polite and ask these basic questions rather than just coming out of the gate, guns blazing, you guys are a-holes and you're blah, 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 and you don't know what you're doing. What is it your grandma used to say? You catch more bees with honey than something or other. Anyway, you get the idea. So also note the public disclosure processes. So you may call that police department or entity and they'll say, you need to go through our public disclosure process. And then they will explain to you what that is. There might be specific forms and things that you need to fill out for that public disclosure. Now, if they start getting a little bit, well, here's what I would ask them. I would ask them, first of all, what evidence have you ever had in your custody in this case? And identify, because some of them will just say, oh, what evidence do you have in this case? And that's the only question they answer. Here's what we have. They don't mention what they used to have, right? So ask them, what have you ever had in your custody? Then please provide a detailed chain of custody for each item, including where it is right now. And that could be whether they have it or it's gone. And then you can also add another thing that says, if the evidence was destroyed or released, please provide documentation on when and how it was destroyed, who authorized the destruction, and who witnessed that destruction. Another thing that you could state is if the items are not currently in your custody, but they haven't been destroyed. So like that other scenario we were talking about, it went to the lab or it went to the DA or went to the court. Ask them to provide documentation for when and where the item was transferred there. And then they may already have a copy, you may already have a copy of the investigative file, but if not, then you can request a copy of that investigative file. Again, research that public disclosure. Now, when they respond, here's my recommendation. Take what they have given you and start going through it piece by piece. And remember our chain of custody that tells a story? Start laying out the story, okay? Here's what I do. As I literally go into a Word document, you could use Excel too, and create a table for each specific item. You don't want to have every piece of evidence in this table. You want a chain of custody for every single individual item, because each one, it's a different item. It was collected at a different location by a different person, and each one has its own life, right? So to keep things simple, create a table for each item and then fill in those questions we asked earlier, the who, the what, the when, the where, for the chain of custody, and then highlight the missing information. Now, before we go to the next slide, I want to tell you that I've put together a little cheat sheet, checklist, etc. of here's the stuff to start out with, and you can copy and paste those questions. But then I also have another one that's more detailed. If they start getting snitty with you, if they refuse to respond, if they won't answer the questions, if they're pushing back, and then the questions that you can dive into more to figure out, you know, did they just not do their job? Are they hiding something? Are there systemic problems with the agency? You know, is it corruption? That kind of thing. So those will be available as handouts later. Okay, let's take a look at how I did this table for a piece of evidence. Now, this is in an actual case, and it's actual information. I have gone in, you'll see a lot of white in there because I went in and redacted names, the name of the agency, the name of the people, or everything. But I wanted to show you that I started with, you know, I have my columns for date, time, where it is, the people that was involved, and what kind of documentation I had in order to show that and prove that. So I started, this one didn't get off on the right foot right off the bat, because we have the date. We know it because according to the report, this was a sexual assault kit. It was collected on this date, but we don't know by who or where or what time, or we know nothing. Now, as I went through this, I got all my documentation. I started filling in everything. And then I went through with my highlighter and I highlighted where are the gaps? Where is the missing evidence? Now, in this chain of custody for this item between 1984 and 1988, there were 49 omissions on the chain of custody. Another mic drop moment. And so this yellow basically tells us, you know, oh, this went to the lab. No idea who got it from the lab or where they stored it. Here are some things that we could spend an hour on this going through it and dissecting it, but I just want to point out a couple things. First of all, the location of this sexual assault kit was unknown from May of 1985 to December of 1987. No idea. And the location was unknown from May of 88 until July of 88. This was post-trial. He had already been convicted and was in prison. And these are the ones I was talking about earlier, how the movement didn't make sense to me. Why did the DA's office come check this out and open it up and look at it after he had been convicted and was in prison? Why did it go back to the ME's office that did their analysis? Why did it go back to them after the person had been, you know, convicted? So I realize that this seems kind of rudimentary. This is how my brain works, and this is how I'm able to look at something and see here's the gaps. So what this does is it now prompts you to know, okay, what more do I need to ask? They've given you the information you initially asked for, but there's a whole lot of holes. So now you can start looking at each one and asking specific questions about, why there was a gap and why there was no documentation. And then it can lead to all sorts of other things that will be in my long one, like, okay, during that period of time it was missing, did you do a full inventory? If you did, was that item in your inventory at the time? Those types of things that will just evolve. So I desperately want to help you. Like I said, I met Rebecca Brown from the Innocence Project in 2008, and in 2009, she referred me to an attorney on behalf of Alan Newton, and that is why I started Focus on Evidence. And I have to tell you that I'm a passionate person, and I used to be, my 23 years in law enforcement, I used to be one of those, yeah, they said they didn't do it, they all did it. We have a warm body in prison. Of course he did it. I didn't care. I get those letters at my police department. Please help me. I'm innocent. And I go, right? And that's what 99% of law enforcement does. And I had an awakening. I had a born again moment when I started handling these cases. And my husband will tell you, I sat at my desk or my dining room table with thousands of pieces of paper. And as I was researching this, I shed a lot of tears for these people. I was angry. I cussed a lot when I would go through and see how agencies had handled this, and their absolute, I don't know, apathy. They just, I'll just say they don't give a shit, right? And I became passionate about the Innocence Project. These people that I have worked with are wonderful people, and the injustice that was done to them is heartbreaking. And I have become so passionate about this. I want to help anybody who needs help. I'll review your research. If you want to show me what you've done so far, I will help you with, here, some additional questions maybe to ask. Maybe we need to take a deeper dive at their policies and procedures, their audit reports, are they accredited, things like that, and find out, are there some systemic problems there at the agency of neglect that led to this happening? It wasn't just, a simple human mistake. It was they had complete indifference to the way that they're managing their evidence. So we're going to open it up for questions, and I will answer any questions that you have.
Thanks, Shannon. Folks, we've got about 5 minutes remaining for questions. Folks can drop them in the chat. Additionally, in about 3 minutes, you'll see a short survey pop up on your screen. That's part of our requirements for the grant under which this webinar is being produced. Please take the time to answer those questions.
Oops, sorry. Oh, you're going to do that yourself, right? Because I don't have that survey
Nope,
thing.
we'll take care of that.
Okay. Or is that this one?
Nope, we'll do it. Marissa's
Okay.
got it.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, there's the NIST handbook. Okay. So let's go to questions. Does anybody have anything burning on their mind?
Give folks a minute to respond.
I reached out to the individual attorneys that I worked with on these cases. Some of them preferred to have my written professional opinion remain confidential, and others have indicated that they are fine with me sharing my professional written opinion. If you feel like you have a specific case that you'd like to discuss with me, and I know, oh, this case, actually, we had the exact same issues, and it's one that the attorney has said, I can share my opinion with you, I will share it with you. I just ask that you, keep it confidential and not have it be out there for public dissemination. But I will be happy to help you.
I'll add, as Shannon mentioned, she's available to assist you in figuring out where the stuff you're looking for is located and potentially trying to find it. And of course, is also available for all the services that File on Q would offer with regard to evidence retention, storage, digitization as well.
Right, right.
As far as support on individual cases, if you are a post-conviction DNA grantee, I saw a lot of folks that I work with in the room here. The Quattrone Center can work with you to work with Shannon. So Shannon, and working with Shannon may also be covered under your grant. So if you have questions about that, please contact us here at the Quattrone Center so that we can help you best situate you to work with Shannon if that's the right thing for the situation
Right.
you're in.
And I
Shannon,
will be doing that in my capacity with Focus on Evidence.
excellent. I have one question here in the
Okay,
last 2
sure.
minutes. In the example that you showed of the evidence room as you found it, and then the
Yes.
evidence room as you reorganized it,
Uh-huh.
how did you handle bulky items of evidence?
Yes. So let me show you really quick. Here's what I did. This is actually in a class that I teach about organization methods and everything, and we do a little exercise in Find the Wasted Space. So what I did is, see, you can see all this wasted space above items, and the shelves are too tall and that type of thing. So here's what I did. It's kind of hard to see because a lot of my evidence room was behind me in the picture, but I took all of my long-term things and I moved them up top to around the perimeter of the room. And then the bottom, you can kind of see here in this and right over here, I left the bottom shelf big so I could put backpacks and monitors and big stuff. So the bottom shelf all the way around the perimeter of my facility was for big stuff. And then really big stuff, I had another room adjacent to this that was for the door, the mattress, the keg, the ATV, you know, the big stuff.
And what about items that needed to be kept chilled? And what about items that were in the process of drying?
So most agencies have a drying cabinet. If you would like to see some pictures and stuff, I'd be happy to send them to you, but they will have a temporary refrigerator, temporary freezer, then you'll have a long-term fridge or freezer. Some agencies have these great big walk-in refrigerators that are the size of a grocery store. And drying, they have drying cabinets that have their own protocol for how they are cleaned, how they're documented, how people put items in there and secure it, and that type of thing too.
And then would you put your contact information back for this last minute?
Yes, absolutely. Right here.
We are just here at time. So we see we have one question holding in the chat. So
Sure.
Megan, I see you. Here's Shannon's contact information. So I hope you'll be able to reach out to her and ask your question. So folks, thank you so much for joining us for this talk. This talk, as all in this series are, will be archived on the Quattrone Center website. In the coming months, please also look out for a separate DNA resources website in addition to the conviction review site where these talks are hosted. DNA TTA remains available to support you with expert review, with anything else that comes up in the casework. And we're so glad that you join us each month. And thank you to Shannon. Really wonderful and informative talk. And folks should look for that tip sheet coming in the next days.
Yes, thank you. I want you guys to know that you are also an essential piece of this puzzle. And some people, their puzzle is not complete. And I can't thank you enough for the time and dedication that you're doing to advocate for these people. So thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. And thank you everyone for
will
being
see
here.
We'll see you next month. We will have another DNA special edition.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.